In the rugged terrain of Anatolia during the late 13th century, a small principality began to rise under the leadership of a man whose name would echo through centuries. Osman I, the founder of what would become the mighty Ottoman Empire, was not born into greatness. He inherited a modest borderland beylik from his father Ertugrul in the Sigd region. But it was Osman's vision, his charisma, and his extraordinary leadership style that would transform this minor stronghold into a burgeoning state. Osman was more than just a tribal chieftain. He was a unifier, a tactician, and a deeply spiritual leader. At a time when the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum was crumbling under Mongol pressure and the Byzantine Empire was weakening, Osman saw not just chaos but opportunity. His statecraft was not rooted merely in brute force, but in a deep understanding of diplomacy, religious legitimacy, and loyalty. Osman's rise began with calculated alliances and targeted raids against vulnerable Byzantines and forts. Unlike some of his contemporaries who relied purely on military conquest, Osman ensured that his leadership was also backed by religious scholars and local notables. This gave him both divine legitimacy and local support. One of the most enduring stories about Osman's destiny is the famous dream of Osman. As legend goes, Osman dreamt that a tree sprouted from his chest and spread its branches across the world. A spiritual leader interpreted this dream as a sign that Osman would found a vast and enduring empire. Whether mythical or not, this dream symbolized Osman's deep connection to Islamic values, which he cleverly integrated into his governance. Osman's leadership style was inclusive and practical. He didn't seek to crush those he conquered. Instead, he often allowed local populations to continue practicing their religions and traditions, particularly the Christian subjects of the former Byzantine towns. In return, they paid taxes and pledged loyalty. This tolerant approach laid the groundwork for a multi-ethnic empire. His charisma also played a vital role. Osman inspired fierce loyalty among his warriors, known as Ghazis. These were not just soldiers. They were religious warriors who saw their battles as part of a divine struggle. Osman didn't just lead them in war, he led them in faith. This combination of religious motivation and practical governance made Osman's principality a magnet for other Turkic tribes and Muslim warriors who sought both plunder and purpose. Osman's administrative style was also revolutionary for his time. Though the early Ottomans didn't yet have a fully structured bureaucracy, Osman laid the foundation for one. He established key posts such as military commanders, judges, and tax collectors, choosing men based on merit and loyalty. This merit-based selection process would later become a hallmark of Ottoman administration. But Osman's greatest legacy perhaps lies not in his military victories or his early conquests, but in the values he embedded into the DNA of the Ottoman state. He emphasized justice, unity, and service to Islam. He understood that an empire built solely on fear or wealth would crumble, but one rooted in loyalty, belief, and structure could endure. By the time of his death around 1324, Osman I had laid the bedrock of what would become one of history's greatest empires. His state was still small, but its foundations were solid, and his son, Orhan, would continue to expand and formalize the systems his father began. Osman didn't leave behind palaces or monuments. He left behind a vision and a disciplined, inspired band of followers who believed in that vision with all their hearts. That legacy, more than anything, would carry the Ottoman name across 3 continents and 6 centuries. As Osman I's territorial control expanded, so too did the responsibilities of governance. His genius lay not only in military conquest, but in his innate understanding that war alone cannot build an empire. What followed was the slow and deliberate shaping of a governance model, rudimentary yet visionary, that laid the foundation for the sophisticated Ottoman bureaucracy to come. Osman's leadership was pragmatic, adaptive, and rooted in the socio-political realities of his time. His territory was a mosaic of Muslim Turks, Byzantine Christians, and various nomadic tribes. Rather than impose a singular rigid system, Osman respected the diversity within his domain. His approach to governance was flexible. He retained existing structures where beneficial and modified them only when necessary. One of Osman's most notable strategies was his use of the timur system, a rudimentary form of land-based feudalism that evolved significantly under later sultans. While the full-fledged system would be implemented by his successors, Osman began allocating land revenues to his warriors as rewards for loyalty and military service. These early grants created a bond between the central authority and the warrior class, ensuring not just military strength but a reliable administrative backbone. The concept of justice was paramount in Osman's rule. Although the empire was still in its infancy, Osman established Qadis Islamic judges to settle disputes based on Sharia law. These Qadis ensured that both Muslim and non-Muslim subjects had a legal recourse, fostering trust in the Ottoman leadership. It was this commitment to justice, known as adalet, that later sultans would boast about and institutionalize into the Ottoman identity. Religion also played a central role in Osman's governance. He understood the spiritual unity it could provide in a culturally fragmented landscape. Osman's close relationship with religious figures like Sheikh Edebali, who later became his spiritual advisor and father-in-law, was more than symbolic. Edebali's wisdom and spiritual counsel influenced Osman's philosophy of leadership. The idea that rulers must serve their people with humility, piety, and justice became an unwritten code of conduct. In fact, Osman reportedly adopted many of Edebali's principles into his personal rule. According to legend, one of Edebali's most famous pieces of advice to Osman was, "From now on, hatred is for us. Love is for you." This statement encapsulated the Sufi ideal that spiritual strength and love must guide leadership. Such ideals permeated the early Ottoman identity. Another significant element of Osman's statecraft was his skillful diplomacy with surrounding powers. He maintained cordial, though strategic, relations with neighboring Muslim beyliks, focusing his aggression primarily toward the Byzantine frontier. This decision was not just religiously symbolic but strategically smart. Byzantine forts were isolated, poorly reinforced, and ripe for gradual conquest. Osman's calculated pressure on these vulnerable outposts allowed him to expand with minimal resistance from rival Turkic rulers. In these newly conquered lands, Osman adopted an administrative model that became characteristic of the Ottomans: tolerance combined with structured control. Local populations, especially Christians, were allowed to maintain their churches, customs, and language. They paid taxes to the Ottoman treasury but were otherwise left largely autonomous. This inclusive governance model not only avoided rebellion but also encouraged loyalty from non-Muslim subjects. It also set the tone for the famous millet system that would later formalize religious pluralism in the empire. Osman also paid attention to symbolism and legitimacy. He adopted titles like Bey and Ghazi, which not only reflected tribal and Islamic warrior traditions, but gave him both political and spiritual credibility. His rule was increasingly seen not just as temporal authority, but as divinely sanctioned leadership. This dual legitimacy, political and religious, was critical in unifying his followers and in attracting new ones. Osman's success in blending tribal customs, Islamic governance, and pragmatic administration is what truly marked the birth of Ottoman statecraft. While later sultans would expand and institutionalize these systems, the underlying philosophies were born in Osman's time. He didn't have the tools or resources of a formal empire, but he had the vision and the instinct to lay a framework that was both durable and flexible, even in death. Osman's legacy was carefully preserved and politicized. His burial in Bursa became a sacred site, and future Ottoman sultans made pilgrimage-like visits to honor him. This helped cement a historical narrative of continuity, divine purpose, and national identity, one that began not with a crown or coronation, but with a humble leader on horseback, guided by faith, strategy, and a dream of unity. Osman I's leadership and governance was a delicate dance of tradition and innovation, faith and flexibility. He proved that great empires are not just forged by the sword, but sustained by vision, justice, and the ability to adapt. By the time Osman I passed away around the year 1324, he had built more than just a principality. He had laid the philosophical and administrative foundations for what would become one of the longest-lasting and most influential empires in world history. His death marked the end of an era, but the legacy he left behind was just beginning to unfold. Osman's influence went far beyond the land he conquered or the battles he won. His true legacy lay in the spirit he infused into the Ottoman identity, an identity defined by adaptability, spiritual purpose, pragmatic governance, and imperial ambition rooted in justice. One of Osman's most enduring contributions was the creation of a shared narrative that unified a diverse population. The Ottoman Empire would eventually span 3 continents and rule over Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike. Osman's model of religious tolerance, born of both faith and necessity, set the tone for centuries of coexistence. This approach allowed the empire to grow without constant rebellion, as many subjects often viewed Ottoman rule as more just and structured than the chaotic regimes they had previously known. His religious inclusivity balanced with Islamic values would evolve into the famous millet system, where each religious community governed itself under the larger umbrella of Ottoman law. Osman didn't live to see the full fruit of this system, but he planted its seeds. Equally important was Osman's emphasis on meritocracy, a concept that would later become central to the empire's administrative structure. Though his early government was modest, he appointed military and judicial leaders not based solely on tribal affiliation or bloodline, but on loyalty, competence, and trust. This approach created a culture where allegiance to the state and not just to a person became paramount. His successors would take this principle and build a robust bureaucracy filled with administrators, scholars, and warriors who often rose through the ranks based on talent. Osman's legacy was also immortalized in symbols, rituals, and traditions that future sultans would follow religiously. The sword-girding ceremony, where each new sultan would be girded with Osman's sword at the tomb of Sheikh Edebali, became a powerful symbol of continuity and spiritual legitimacy. This ceremony was more than tradition. It was a reaffirmation that each ruler was inheriting not just a throne, but a sacred duty born of Osman's vision. The Ottomans saw their empire as a divine trust, and Osman as its prophetic founder. Even in the realm of architecture and urban development, Osman's legacy quietly endured. Though he himself didn't build grand palaces or mosques, his preference for simplicity and functionality would influence early Ottoman architecture. His successors in Bursa, and later in Edirne and Constantinople, would adopt a style that fused Islamic design with Byzantine influence, reflecting the dual heritage Osman had left them. Furthermore, Osman's diplomatic instincts left a mark on Ottoman foreign policy for generations. His decision to avoid direct conflict with neighboring Muslim beyliks and instead focus on expanding into the weakening Byzantine territories became a long-standing strategy. It was both religiously appealing, framing conquests as jihad against non-Muslim rulers, and politically smart, as it minimized internal divisions among Turkic groups. This focus on outward expansion rather than internal rivalry kept the empire from fracturing in its formative years. Osman's personal character, his humility, piety, and resilience, was often idealized in Ottoman chronicles. Historians from later centuries, under imperial patronage, portrayed him as a righteous warrior, a wise ruler, and a man of destiny. While some of these accounts may be romanticized, the fact that Ottoman rulers consistently invoked Osman's name and values shows the weight of his legacy. He was not merely a founder, he became the moral compass of an empire. His story was passed down through generations not just in books but in culture, art, and law. Osman's very name became synonymous with legitimacy. In fact, the term Ottoman itself derives from Osmanli, meaning of Osman. This branding was intentional and powerful. It ensured that the identity of the empire would always be linked to its founder, giving each new sultan a historical and moral lineage to uphold. When challenges arose, civil wars, succession crises, foreign invasions, the Ottomans often invoked the legacy of Osman to unify factions and restore order. The memory of a just and divinely guided founder became a political tool, a spiritual reminder, and a source of national pride. Beyond the Ottoman Empire, Osman's legacy offers timeless lessons in leadership. His ability to dream beyond his circumstances, to unify people of different backgrounds, and to build systems that could outlive him are qualities that define great founders in history. Osman didn't just conquer lands, he conquered hearts, and more importantly, he built an idea. That idea, rooted in unity, justice, and adaptability, survived for more than 6 centuries and influenced regions far beyond Anatolia. In today's world, where leadership is often fleeting and empires rise and fall within decades, Osman I stands as a symbol of what visionary leadership can achieve. He began with a small tribe on the edge of a dying empire. But through faith, discipline, and foresight, he set the course for one of the most remarkable political entities the world has ever known. His empire would stretch from Mecca to Vienna, from Algiers to Baghdad, but its soul would always return to the man in Sigid Osman, the founder, the visionary, the father of a civilization.